Throughout this season, I have been reading a psalm of lament each Sunday, a psalm of lament as a means of declaring that in this place, in this community, we will not live in denial. We will not pretend that the power of positive thinking is going to get us through the valley. Don't get me wrong. I've got a couple of toes in the New Age community, and I'm going to keep them there. But there is a need in this world for truth-telling, for screaming, for lamenting, for creating a space for people to be honest about their pain. And creating that space is central to this tradition. So I share with you, again, some words from Anne Weems, who wrote a book of laments after the premature death of her son. O God of my heart, it is your name I call when the stars do not come out. O God of my soul, it is to you I turn when the torrents of terror drown me. O God of mercy, it is for your hand I reach when I stumble on the stones of sorrow. O God of justice, it is to you I cry when the landslide of grief buries me. I stand beneath the night where stars used to shine and remember, gazing mesmerized at the luminaries of the sky until I could walk the ink-blue beach between their shining. Then their shining stopped, for they left the sky. And you, O God, left with them. And I am left alone beneath a starless sky with a starless heart that barely beats. So I'm going to just give us a little recap because I've been trying to build each theme from the week before. So I'm just going to read these slides and then we'll take another step. We live in a culture that is addicted to perfection. And just as further background, in order to prepare for this series around mental health, in November I met with a group from the Circle of Friends, all who wrestle with different shades of mental health. And I was taking notes furiously while they shared their experience with them. So this is not from a book, nor is it from necessarily a clinical perspective. It's from walking with a group of friends, checking some stuff on the internet, and talking to people with experience. So we live in a culture that's addicted to perfection. In light of the cultural standards of health, beauty, family, most of us are complete failures. Escalating anxiety and depression among youth is almost pandemic. Social media and technology identified as among the main problems. We'll be hosting a panel that involves young people here in a week and a half, but here's just one little tidbit from one of Michael Enright's conversations. There was a little bit of a documentary on young women and social media, and a 22-year-old in university said that once she puts a picture of herself up on Instagram, if she doesn't get 50 likes within an hour, she gets depressed. And that's not laughable, as ridiculous as that sounds. She talked about her addiction to needing to be affirmed by posting pictures of herself on social media. And if that isn't a recipe for craziness. So that's where it's at, and that's one story. Psychiatrists like Gabor Mate believe that some of our mental health issues can be credited to society, who insist that there is a bar for normal, and they will tell us what that bar is. And most people don't think they can aspire to it. The pain of those wrestling with mental health is unique. It's not like having a sore back or a sore neck. Instead, the comment was, "I hurt." Anxiety is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think I am flawed, and it perpetuates itself. It is a very distracting and distorting internal conflict, and in the middle of that conflict, the birds, beauty, joy, everything disappears. As a result, those who wrestle with anxiety and depression are further isolated. Research tells us, and this is Dr. Heather Stewart, who will be with us on Thursday, that the cultural stigma around mental health is bigger than we know, which means it perpetuates self-stigmatizing, putting up large, so that those who experience mental illness put up their own internal barriers to hide their illness. But apart from this, the third piece of research tells us that most people who wrestle with mental health will recover and lead full lives. Our own use of language is important. Bouts, periods of mental health are crippling in our lives. They cripple us, but they do not handicap us. Therefore, talking about it as a community is essential for the purpose of creating safe spaces for those who are vulnerable. So last week the focus was, wow, why so much cultural stigma? Why so much judgment? And my personal conclusion, once again, not based on research, is that probably there's a bit of shame in all of us for something. And we reduce our own shame or mask our own shame or forget our own shame if we can find someone who we can judge, so that we just have a bit of an edge, although always living with the fear that we don't. So looking in the mirror and going, wow, what do I get out of being part of this culture of judgment? So one more step today. And to take it, I'm going to read a passage of within Gospel of Mark. But before reading that, I just want to say a couple of things. The wisdom of Jesus is not one size fits all. Okay, so that when we read through the accounts of the life of Jesus, different people come to Jesus wanting different things, and he usually sends them all off with something different, something unique for them. So unfortunately, sometimes the church over the seasons has kind of got stuck on one particular offer of wisdom. So for example, Nicodemus, who is a Sadducee, a priest, comes to Jesus in the middle of the night because he's wrestling with what makes sense to him in his tradition. And what Jesus says to him really is, you know, Nicodemus, you are really, really schooled as a religious teacher and instructor, but I hate to tell you that in order to get where I think you want to go, you cannot rely on your own mind and your own theological education. You are going to have to be born again to the movement of the mystery. And then somebody took that born again stuff and made it about all of us, right? Well, it happened to be about Nicodemus. It might be about you. Maybe not. And then, you know, on another occasion, a rich young ruler came to Jesus and was obviously dissatisfied with his life. And he was looking for meaning, and Jesus said, well, as long as your identity is tied up with all your possessions, you will probably never stumble into the life that you long for. So you might want to think about your relationship with your possessions. We never apply that to everybody, do we? Especially not ourselves. So here's another encounter that may provide some wisdom for the conversation we're having, or not, because it's not one size fits all. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather she grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, if I but touch his clothes, I know I will be made well. Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, who touched me? He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. So on the first evening that I met with this circle of friends to discuss their own journey through mental health challenges, I posed this question. What is saving you? To which one replied with the name of a special friend in their life. Another one replied with the name of their new therapist, although they had seen many therapists in their lives. Those conversations had not gone anywhere. And finally, the third person replied, me. I've saved me because I never gave up. So a friend, someone in the mental health profession, and ourselves. An interesting trinity, don't you think? And of course, on any given day, the answer to that question might shift. So 2 of the answers reflect that need for connection, to friendship, to community, and to a professional with whom we click and who opens up possibilities for meaning-making and healing and wisdom and insight and a return to self. But I want us to think a bit about the third reply. I saved me because I never gave up. So this is where I have to say, I had it printed and then I took it out, that it's not one size fits all. And here are some thoughts. And I offer them with grace, and I hope you receive them with grace. So Dr. Heather Stewart, whose research is all around mental health and stigma in particular, suggests that we all need to be in the driver's seat when it comes to our mental well-being. I personally have seen what happens when that role of self-determination has been stolen from someone. My brother Kerry has an old friend. His name is Harley. Harley was off the page, funny, innocent, kind, good-hearted, and bipolar. His parents, and part of it had to do with their particular theological bent, could not cope with the Harley who had the crazy ideas and sometimes tried to follow through on them and failed. And so they obtained power of attorney and are in control of his life, his doctor's appointments, his living conditions, his meds. And seeing Harley every summer when I visit my family, Regina, is as depressing an experience as I've ever had because he has been medicated beyond himself. Medicated so that he is no longer able to come up with a funky, crazy idea, let alone try and follow through on it. It is an extreme case, but it is a case of treatment and paternalism driven by the fear and shame of his parents. So what interests me most about the passage that speaks of the woman with the hemorrhage is that for years, even under the care of physicians, she got worse, but she never gave up. And Jesus does not claim to be the healer here. You are the healer, he implies. You and your courage and your perseverance, you. And so whether you knock on every professional door or read every book or hold fast to every friend or just refuse to give up, you decide. And I know that there's something about that I don't like to hear, and I even feel a bit uneasy saying. But I do think on a deep level that it is true. We decide. But I'm not done yet. So. We decide that we are worth the struggle. This does not abdicate the role of community. This does not abdicate the need for grace and compassion. But the pursuit of our own well-being is our pursuit to choose. And at the same time, we stand in grace and compassion and patience as those we love wrestle to make these choices, understanding that some of them cannot. They cannot. And we do not blame them for this. Canadian comedian Mike MacDonald just died at the age of 63. He did a lot to take the mask off of the whole subject of mental health. He's had his share of maladies, as he puts it: addiction, hepatitis C, a liver transplant, and bipolar disorder. He said, "What bothers me about the mental health thing is the people who say stuff like, 'It'll get better, don't worry.' My attitude is, I can take you to a graveyard and show you a bunch of people that it didn't get better for. But what I advocate is it can get better. And I'm living proof of that." It's a mysterious alchemy, this journey towards mental well-being. It takes courage and patience and support and traveling companions. It's grueling work that I think is made more manageable in a circle of friends, where the truth can be told without judgment, where standards of perfection and propriety are called out, where attitudes of grace and respect make room for what is real. And perhaps all we can do in the midst of the mystery of it all is to embrace ourselves and our own imperfection and commit ourselves to flexibility and humor and compassion. And trust that for today it will be enough.